Jonah was a man who liked order. He thrived in a structured environment where everything had its place and purpose. He had his routines, meticulously planned and faithfully executed each day. His favorite mug, always filled with the same blend of tea at the same time each morning. And a life that was predictable and comfortable, a sanctuary built on consistency. He lived in a small town where everyone knew him, a place where life moved at a gentle pace. A prophet, but just living his life, quietly observing the world around him. He wasn't one for grand pronouncements or public displays. Jonah wasn't looking for adventure. He preferred the familiar and the known. He wanted peace, not drama. A quiet life, free from disruption. He talked to God, but on his own terms, in his own space, a comfortable and controlled dialogue. His plans were simple, and he liked it that way. Each day was a reflection of the last, a comforting rhythm. But life doesn't always stick to our plans. Sometimes the unexpected arrives, shattering our carefully constructed realities. One day everything changed. The predictable became unpredictable, the comfortable, unsettling. God sent Jonah a message, a direct line, an undeniable call to action. This wasn't a friendly check-in, it was a mission, a task that would demand everything of him. God's request was about to turn Jonah's world upside down, challenging his beliefs and his very way of life. Jonah thought he was in control, but he was about to learn otherwise. The illusion of control was about to be shattered. Life has a way of reminding us we're not the ones steering the ship. We are merely passengers on a journey with a destination we may not understand. Jonah's carefully arranged world was about to get very uncomfortable. His peace was about to be profoundly disturbed. He was about to discover that his plans and God's plans were worlds apart, a collision course between his will and a divine purpose. Sometimes the biggest lessons come when we're forced out of our comfort zones. It is in these moments of discomfort that we truly grow. Jonah's story begins with a man who thought he had it all figured out, a man confident in his path, secure in his beliefs. But the real story is about what happens when everything you know is suddenly upended, when the foundations of your life begin to crumble. Jonah was about to get a crash course in letting go, in surrendering to a power greater than himself. His adventure was just beginning, a journey of self-discovery and divine intervention. Jonah's life, once predictable, was about to be dramatically altered. His routine was shattered by a direct order from God, a divine assignment that would test his faith and challenge his very understanding of justice and mercy. It was a call to action that would take him far from his comfort zone and into the heart of a city steeped in sin. Go to Nineveh. Nineveh was no ordinary city. It was huge, a sprawling metropolis that dominated the landscape. Its walls were imposing, its influence far-reaching. It was a center of power, a hub of activity, and a place where wickedness thrived. Wild and infamous for its wickedness. Its reputation preceded it, a dark cloud hanging over its inhabitants. It was a place where injustice reigned, and compassion seemed to have vanished. The people there were the last ones Jonah wanted to face. They were known for their cruelty, their violence, and their utter disregard for God's laws. God wanted Jonah to warn them, change your ways or face destruction. A message of impending doom, a chance for redemption, a plea for repentance. The task felt impossible and terrifying. It was a daunting mission, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Jonah was overwhelmed by fear. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on him, suffocating his courage. Why him? Why Nineveh? He pictured himself alone in a hostile city, a lone voice crying out in a sea of indifference, delivering a message no one wanted to hear, a message of judgment, a call to repentance, a warning of consequences. The fear grew until it drowned out everything else. It consumed his thoughts, paralyzed his will, and blinded him to the possibility of hope. Jonah decided he wasn't going. He couldn't bring himself to face the challenge, to confront the wickedness, to risk his own safety. He couldn't do it. Instead, he made a new plan. A plan to escape, to hide, to avoid the responsibility that had been placed upon him. One born of panic, not faith. A desperate attempt to control his own destiny, to rewrite the script that God had written for him. He would run as far as he could, away from Nineveh and away from God's command. He sought to distance himself not only geographically, but also spiritually. Jonah's answer was simple: no. He wasn't just avoiding a hard job, he was fleeing from his calling. He was turning his back on the very purpose for which he had been created. Sometimes fear makes us run from the very thing we're meant to do. It whispers doubts in our ears, magnifies the obstacles, and convinces us that we are not capable. Jonah's desperate escape was about to set a wild chain of events in motion. His act of disobedience would have far-reaching consequences, impacting not only his own life but the lives of others as well. He thought he could outrun God's plan. He was wrong. The pursuit had begun. Jonah wasted no time at all. The weight of God's command pressed heavily on him, and the only solution he could see was to flee. He acted swiftly, driven by a desperate desire to escape his divinely appointed task. He packed his meager belongings with a sense of urgency and headed straight for Joppa, the nearest bustling port city he could find. Joppa offered the promise of escape, a gateway to a life far removed from Nineveh and God's daunting request. At the harbor, amidst the cacophony of sailors and merchants, he searched for a ship. Finally, he found a weathered vessel bound for Tarshish, the farthest place he could imagine from Nineveh, a distant land that represented the ultimate act of defiance against God's will. It was a place where he hoped to disappear, to start anew, free from his burden. He paid his fare, handing over the coins with a mix of guilt and determination, sealing his pact with the sea. He boarded the ship, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As he stepped onto the deck, he felt a fleeting sense of relief wash over him, a temporary reprieve from the weight of his disobedience. As the ship slowly sailed away from the harbor, leaving Joppa behind, Jonah, for a brief moment, genuinely believed he'd escaped his responsibility, that he had outsmarted God himself. Seeking refuge from his troubled thoughts, he hid in the ship's dark and musty hold, alone and exhausted from the frantic escape. Overwhelmed by the day's events, he quickly fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But you can't run from your problems forever, especially when your problem is a direct command from God, the Almighty. Jonah naively thought that physical distance would somehow solve everything, that escaping Nineveh meant escaping his destiny. But the sea is vast and unforgiving, and God's reach, his influence, is infinitely vaster still, encompassing all of creation. Jonah's escape was nothing more than a fleeting illusion, a temporary delusion. He was about to learn in the most dramatic way possible that running away from God only leads to bigger, more terrifying storms, both literal and metaphorical. Sometimes the harder you run and the further you try to escape, the more likely you are to end up right back where you're supposed to be, facing the very thing you tried to avoid. Jonah's journey had only just begun, in reality, and the real trouble, the kind that shakes you to your core, was just about to start. He foolishly thought he'd found a clever way out of his predicament. But the storm, both literal and metaphorical, was inevitably coming, and it was going to change everything. While Jonah slept, a violent storm erupted. The seasoned sailors panicked. This was no ordinary storm. They threw cargo overboard and prayed to their gods, but nothing worked. The captain found Jonah asleep and demanded he pray for help. The sailors cast lots to find the cause of their trouble. The lot fell on Jonah. They confronted him. "Who are you? What have you done?" Jonah confessed. "I'm running from the God who made the sea." The sailors were terrified. They realized they were caught in a storm sent by the Creator himself. Jonah's secret was out. The storm raged on, demanding a solution. Jonah's running had put everyone in danger. The sailors, desperate, asked Jonah what to do. Jonah told them, "Throw me into the sea and the storm will stop." They hesitated, but the storm left them no choice. With a prayer for mercy, they tossed Jonah overboard. Instantly, the sea calmed. Jonah sank into the depths, certain it was the end. But God had other plans. A giant fish swallowed Jonah whole. Inside the belly of the fish, Jonah found himself alive but trapped. It was dark, wet, and hopeless. He had run from his mission and ended up in the strangest prison imaginable. Jonah was alone with his thoughts, facing the consequences of his choices. He had tried to escape, but now he was utterly powerless. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to look up. Jonah's escape had led him to a place of total surrender. The lesson was just beginning. For 3 days and nights, Jonah sat in darkness inside the fish. With nothing but time, he reflected on his choices. Fear gave way to humility. Jonah began to pray, not out of panic, but with genuine surrender. He thanked God for saving him from drowning. He admitted his stubbornness and pride. Jonah realized he couldn't outrun God. He promised to obey if given another chance. Salvation comes from the Lord, he prayed. In that darkness, Jonah's heart changed. His prayer was a turning point. God heard him. The fish swam to shore and spit Jonah out onto dry land. Jonah was alive, covered in seaweed, but free. He had been given a second chance. Sometimes the deepest darkness brings the brightest clarity. Jonah's journey wasn't over. It was starting anew. He was ready to listen. Jonah stood on the beach, a changed man. The world looked different. He'd survived the impossible. God's command came again, "Go to Nineveh." This time Jonah obeyed. He set out for the city he once feared. Each step was an act of faith. Jonah entered Nineveh and delivered God's warning. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. He expected anger or ridicule, but something incredible happened. The people listened. From the greatest to the least, they believed Jonah's message. The city, known for its wickedness, was suddenly open to change. Jonah's obedience sparked a miracle. Sometimes the hardest path leads to the greatest impact. Jonah had finally embraced his purpose. The city's fate now hung in the balance. Nineveh's response was astonishing. The people didn't mock Jonah, they repented. News reached the king, who humbled himself and called for citywide fasting and prayer. Everyone, even the animals, joined in. The king urged, "Give up your evil ways. Maybe God will show mercy." The entire city turned from its violence. God saw their genuine change and relented. Nineveh was spared. It was a stunning act of mercy, a second chance for an entire city. But Jonah was furious. He had expected destruction, not forgiveness. He sulked outside the city, angry at God's compassion. "I knew you were merciful," Jonah complained. He struggled to accept that God's love extended even to his enemies. Jonah's journey wasn't just about obedience. It was about understanding grace. Sometimes the hardest lesson is accepting that forgiveness is for everyone. Jonah had delivered the message, but he still had more to learn. The story wasn't over yet. Jonah sat outside Nineveh, still angry. God grew a plant to shade him, and Jonah was briefly happy. But the next day, God sent a worm to destroy the plant. The sun beat down, and Jonah grew miserable. God asked, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" Jonah insisted it was. God replied, "You care about a plant, but shouldn't I care about a city of thousands?" Jonah's concern was small. God's compassion was vast. The story isn't just about a man and a whale. It's about the size of God's mercy. Forgiveness isn't just for people like us. It's for everyone. Jonah had to learn that compassion matters more than being right. That's the real lesson of Jonah's wild adventure. And if you enjoyed this story, stay tuned. There are more incredible journeys to come. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more inspiring journeys.